Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of In Lay Terms. I'm your host, Payman Ascari, and today in house we have Dr. Anna Sylwestrowicz. And it's not your first time here, but I have had an opportunity to learn how to pronounce your name. So welcome back.
You did a great job. You can say it better than I can say it.
I've been practicing with all the other podcasters I've been recommending you to. So they ask me, how do we pronounce it? I'm like, it's like this.
So as you can see from one of my diplomas over there, when I was chief resident, I had a different last name. And so some of my publications are under that name. And then I went back to switch to my maiden name. And here we are. It's a tough one, but I'm going to keep it.
Sounds good. It's a very powerful name.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking. So first things first, before we get to anything serious, I'm looking at all of the degrees behind you. You have more degrees than all my family combined.
Right?
What are you, like a superstar? Do you have like multiple medical degrees?
Kind of.
Walk us through it.
I come from an immigrant parents, an only child, and education was, just pushed. It was encouraged. And so I got into medical school when I was 19, and I kept trying to advance up that academic ladder, but there was always, towards the end of it, there was a glass ceiling. They let you get up to a certain point, but when money gets involved, it's a little tougher. Yeah.
What do you mean by glass ceiling? Like, is it like politics where you need a lot of money to grease palms?
Well, we won't get into all of that because, I don't want to whine. I want to provide solutions. But I was the chief resident. I never did get the position at Vancouver General Hospital because the male panel of people felt that I was having too many kids. And so that didn't happen. So came to Victoria and carried on, and then wanted to do cardiac. But of course, you can't work in cardiac anesthesia earning an extra $200,000 a year if you're working 3/4 time, because how could you possibly maintain your skill set? But then, nobody wanted to do dental anesthesia. And then dental anesthesia started to pay $500 an hour. And all of a sudden, only the cardiac anesthetist could go do dental anesthesia because it's so specialized. So,
Okay, go ahead.
So you can
see.
I
was just going to pick up further on that. You said you're an anesthesiologist, and before we went live, you were talking about how you guys are sort of immune from the impacts of Big Pharma.
Yeah, for the most part. When we do clinical research, and not that we do a lot of clinical research on the island, but even at BC Children's Hospital, which is where I did some of my research, or Vancouver General, a lot of the studies aren't pharma funded, and we just do basic science research. And and there's some areas of medicine where clinical research is entirely pharma funded. And you can see that those papers that's not really clinical research. That's more aggressive pharma marketing. And there are incentives in order to prescribe and inject and honorariums to do things. And sometimes we do things in medicine that aren't really in the best interest of the patient, but the pharma is giving us enough kickbacks, whether that be at the institutional level or at the individual level, to do trials. And I think that's what got me going, was basic science research. You should never really do clinical trials on people that have not signed informed consent. And so for-profit, entirely pharma-funded clinical research where patients are not signing informed consent or unable to sign informed consent for whatever reason, because they have dementia or because they have mental health issues or whatever, it's very problematic for me to see that certain groups of people can be used as guinea pigs, really, without consent. And there was a precedent case called the Dan Markinson case in the University of Minnesota, where a young man was put in a Seroquel trial, and he killed himself violently with a box cutter. And there was no justice. Everybody just covered it up, except for the bioethicist, Dr. Carl Elliott, who wrote about it. And he's written many books on the topic of consent, such as White Coat, Black Hat, and The Occasional Human Sacrifice.
So before my follow-up question, somebody in the audience, it's David from the Freedom Conversation podcast. She's back on again. Cool. I think you talked to him yesterday.
I connected with David, I think, because he knew you. And, I'm not, I'm just going to say it right now. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I am not anti-science. I am not a radical person. I'm not a Scientologist, no matter what they try and paint me as. I am just a very allopathic, I guess, educated medical doctor who's been at it now for 34 years. And sometimes I'm really disappointed in what we do to people and my colleagues. And you can't criticize any of that because that's seen as unprofessional, unethical, and disparaging colleagues. But there's no excuse for some of the things that are going on at the health authority that I used to work at, which is the Vancouver Island Health Authority. And David, I worked as a porter at the same institution, so he's aware of some of the things I'm talking about.
Yeah, I actually talked with him yesterday as well. Let's start by exploring your view for how healthcare should look in Canada, and I guess I can feed you a loaded question just to get it started. It's my understanding that in BC, to get licensed as a doctor or educated, you have to go through UBC, and UBC sets the number per year. How would you do it if you had a magic wand?
Well, I think the market forces are such that should be dictating how many doctors we have for a certain population. And they've looked at that. And I believe it's one doctor for 1250 patients. And we actually have enough doctors. So why is it that 21% of the BC population doesn't have access to a family doctor? And why are 10 million people across Canada using telemedical apps like TELUS and Maple? And what is going on? And I think part of when I interview family doctors, many of them feel that they can't practice the way they want to practice. And part of that is smaller clinics are, essentially small businesses. And so they're responsible for the overhead of the clinic. And with the way the fee schedule is working, it just doesn't allow enough time per patient in order to meet, to cover their overhead and to actually make an adequate living wage. And so that has been changed. There are 30 PCCs now, clinics that are government run, and they employ family doctors. But they've been quite expensive, and the productivity isn't nearly as high as in previous times where the clinics were actually run by the family doctors that owned the clinic. So, to solve all of this, I think we can talk, we can criticize. There's some people that have looked outside of the whole system, such as Colwood, and their mayor hired a family doctor who I believe trained in Ireland and came to Canada through Ontario. And she is going to be a city employee. So she'll be working for the city, for the municipality, and not for the health authority. There are 5 provincial health authorities here in BC, and five health authorities and 1 provincial health authority, the PHSA, Provincial Health Services Authority. And so we're very, very top heavy in bureaucracy. And in order to change any of this, it seems to me like it would have to start with very bold leadership at the federal level and taking a look at revisiting the Canada Health Act. And I don't think any politician has the boldness to do that. Because the minute you dive into the Canada Health Act, immediately everybody gets criticized for, oh, you want a 2-tiered healthcare system. Oh, you're all about privatizing healthcare. And so Mark Holland, who's the federal health minister, has said that we have this Canada Health Act and it's universal coverage for everybody. And now we're going to expand the scope of practice for nurses and pharmacists and naturopaths, and they will be able to also bill the medical services plan and cover essential medical care under the Canada Health Act. So instead of really addressing the legislation, they're kind of, massaging it, right? And the other act is called the Indian Act, and the Indian Act is a piece of legislation and something called the White Paper, which was introduced by Trudeau and Chrétien in 1969. And nobody has had really the guts to address that either. And when I talk to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, that act, the Indian Act, will need to be addressed in order to figure out our healthcare system. So we can talk about.
Okay. Well, there's a lot in there. Let's take it from the top. You mentioned the fee scheduled and how it's not really like it's not conducive to the smaller clinics. So what is a fee scheduled and how does it hamper the smaller clinics?
So to give you an example, and I'm not a family doctor, I practiced as a specialist most of my career. I now run this lifestyle cosmetic medical clinic. But to give you an example, I had a patient who had a fungal nail infection, and she didn't respond to the oral antifungals or topical antifungals. And she really didn't require her nails to be taken off. And so that's surgically taken off, and in order so they can regrow in a healthy way. And that takes that takes me approximately an hour to do. I need to have the surgical supplies, which are disposable. I need to provide the local anesthetic, which costs about $40 a vial. I need to do a finger block with a tourniquet. I need to then pull the fingernails off and bandage them, and I need to pay for all those supplies. And I billed the medical services plan in 2017 for this procedure, and I believe I was paid $32. So that was the day I decided I am going to completely opt out and continue my business, and it'll be private, and it'll be it's all private pay, and it's all cosmetic, so to speak. So a fungal fingernail is probably not an essential service, since it was from acrylic nails that are not, that were put on for cosmetic reasons. So and that's why you see so many doctors now working, doing things such as Botox. And it always surprises me that the general public doesn't understand that Botox is a biologic. It comes from hundreds of blood donors. And a lot of people aren't even informed that. So how did a biologic escape Health Canada regulation? And why is it allowed direct to consumer marketing all over the place, $10 a unit? And so we have things like that, where pharma really has been driving the agenda since 2008, since Allergan started marketing their brilliant distinctions programs, points, discounts, incentives for injecting cosmetic injectables.
So this treatment on the fingernail thing, which, by the way, totally disgusting. It's like fingernail torture. But who sets that price for? I think you said $32. Like, are they just throwing darts at a board?
So the Doctors of BC has there's a negotiating group negotiating payments, and it depends on who sits on the boards. So there is a specialist board and a family practice board. We have about 7,000 specialists, 7,000 family doctors in this province. And everybody then negotiates fee schedules. And as you know, at one point, cataracts were quite a complicated procedure, and they were paid a certain amount of money. And now cataracts are quite an easy procedure with the way with the equipment we have. So a lot more cataracts can be done in an 8-hour period, and yet the fee schedule hasn't changed. So there are things like that where certain things are paid quite a bit of money, and they can be done quickly, whether that be a small, like even I think in the urology fee schedule, it says you can only take out one prostate per patient on the same patient per day, because people were manipulating that fee schedule in order to maximize their billings.
Yet another thing I don't want to picture. These people that's made it $32, was this just like a gross oversight, or are they saying this is cosmetic, so we're only going to subsidize it 10%?
Well, I think if you go through the MSP Blue Book and you look at payments for different procedures, and you see just how underpaid certain specialties are, and how probably overpaid some specialties are, excuse me. And I'm not sure, again, doctors are negotiating this, and it all depends on who sits on those negotiating committees at the Doctors of BC level.
I could see this causing a whole host of problems. Like clinics don't want to treat people with fungal infections.
Yeah. So
clinics shutting down.
There's a whole whole host of problems, because we have also physicians in this province, and everybody is paid differently. So we have certain groups that are on salary. We have certain groups that are on what are called caste agreements, academic agreements, and paid for teaching. And we have certain groups that are working for government in these. We're all working for government, but in these clinics with a different pay model. And so you can see how this can be very problematic. If a surgeon, for example, is on a salary and an anesthetist is paid per hour, what is the incentive to do more cases? There is no incentive to work harder. Productivity goes down. And yet, on the other hand, we can't be seeing 8, 9 patients an hour and doing patients any justice, because really, if you have a complicated patient with chronic illness and they've got cardiac problems, respiratory problems, and it really does take about 40 minutes to get a proper medical assessment, get a history, and do a physical examination. So that's the problem. There's certain people that will be falling through the cracks, and they're relying, if 21% of Canadians don't have a family doctor, they're relying on very episodic care on telemedicine. And the goal of telemedical companies are to make a profit. It's not about your well-being. It's just episodic care. Here's a prescription. What else can they do?
Does the opposite happen where a treatment costs like $32 and the government pays $1,000 and it just wastes the money?
Many times, yeah.
And I guess where I'm going with that, does that create like a bad system where the doctors are like, all right, I'm not going to treat these people that might need treatment, and I'm going to push these treatments because it makes me more money?
Sadly, yes. Sometimes.
Right.
Mm-hmm. I mean, let's face it. Human nature is human nature. We have good and bad people, or people with different ethics and morals in all areas of life, whether that be the criminal justice system, whether that be in medicine, in business. And so, yes, sadly, yes, you're in a position of authority over vulnerable people, and these people have no access to care. And sometimes, and obviously in Canada, you don't have a choice. You're assigned a doctor. That may not be the right fit for you at all. I don't want to see a 28-year-old doctor that has just graduated from medical school to talk about my menopausal symptoms. I don't think it's appropriate.
What about, like, to what degree are these clinics private? Can they just give the doctors any salary they want, or does the government limit them?
I don't know enough about that topic. I don't know. I think the way it is right now in Canada, any essential medical care is supposed to be covered by government. So it's illegal to practice private medicine that's essential. So that's why dermatologists are doing now more of these cosmetic clinics, plastic surgery. So these are the loopholes. The loopholes are things that are not essential. So cosmetics are not essential. Beauty is not essential. So then you can get around the Canada Health Act.
And we're using the word public and private. Are these clinics literally Crown Corporation private or public, or are they private but they're funded through government health insurance?
So the patient care clinics, that there are 30 existing clinics in BC, are entirely government funded, and doctors work at those clinics. There are some family doctors that are continuing to try and run their own business, and they're succeeding. I think the fee schedule, they're getting paid more. I don't know enough about this. I don't know enough about the negotiations at the Doctors of BC level between specialists and family doctors. But I also think the idea that we are going to narrow the scope for physicians, and our colleges really monitors everything we do very closely. And yet we're expanding the scope of practice for nurses and naturopaths and pharmacists. I think that's problematic. And it's a little bit discouraging that they feel medicine is so replaceable. They feel that a doctor's experience, credentials can be so easily replaced by a naturopath or a nurse practitioner or even a pharmacist. And that's where I think there's certain loopholes that, to give you an example, my stepson had a sore throat. And in order to prescribe an antibiotic for a sore throat, you should have a group A strep swab done. So there's nowhere you can get a group A strep swab done because they are not available. And there's no access to care anywhere. So I called around, and it turns out Shoppers Drug Mart, one pharmacy, had group A strep swabs available. This is a test that costs maybe $2. Anyway, they charge $35 for this test. So the test comes back positive, but the pharmacist cannot prescribe the antibiotic. And yet, we have pharmacists diagnosing, injecting, and prescribing Plan G drugs. Plan G drugs are mental health drugs. As of November 22, nurses and pharmacists can do that. Now, Plan G drugs, things like also opioids, methadone, those are actually, and depot testosterone, those are considered restricted drugs that required a triplicate that was introduced, I think, in 1980. So why is it that we are allowing nurse practitioners and pharmacists to do such a broad scope of practice, and yet we are restricting doctors like myself, who was told that I can't speak about mental health on social media because that is not in the scope of my practice?
Why do you think that is? Why is that?
So everything is driven by pharma. All our decision making at the moment that's where all the big money is. It's the drug companies. And if you look at the history of, so the triplicate prescription was introduced in 1990. Cancer drugs are the responsibility of the BC Cancer Agency, and it's under the Provincial Health Authority. What they did was, in 2022, they expanded the scope of practice of pharmacists, nurses, whatever. PharmaCare now has 12 plans, and it's amazing just how bureaucratic it is. There is the Fair Pharma Care Plan, there's a Plan W, Plan C, Plan G, Plan B, Plan D. There's a Plan F, P, Z, S, X, M, and they added a Plan Z in 2020, which is for the MAID drugs. The Plan G drugs that I talk about are all the psychiatric medications. We have the First Nations Health Benefits Plan and all the bureaucracy that goes along with it. 3 decades ago, we would have had only maybe 2 or 3 plans, and it was to help the elderly cover the cost of some of the medications that they may need. But now we're just medicating society, we're medicating normal. Now, at the federal level, when Jane Philpott resigned as the health minister, Yves Ducroix took over as the health minister. He refused to look into the costs of drugs. Why is that? Pharma is driving everything. So to give you an example, in a clinic like mine right now, I do cosmetics, so I have to order Botox and dermal filler and laser tips. And because we're a very small clinic, the pricing is actually quite steep from the drug companies. Now, if I had affiliated with a business entity like MedSpa Partners or Dermapure, those are business entities, they bulk purchase all of this, and the pricing is about 1/3 less. So right now, there's a lot of controversy about who is going to pay for vaccine programs in the provinces. You can imagine if the federal government negotiates with Pfizer, they will get discount pricing. If the provinces are negotiating with Pfizer, they're purchasing a lot less of a product. So they won't get the discount pricing nor the free product or incentives or whatever. So somewhere there, we have to look at what is going on. And is it really necessary to have pharma paid lobbyists lobbying the federal government for certain medications? If medications are truly essential, they're on the list of the Essential Medicines World Health Organization of life-saving drugs. Why do we need pharma paid lobbyists from Global or from Capitol Hill lobbying our federal government and connecting and getting things done because somebody knows someone in the Prime Minister's office. That doesn't seem appropriate. And then while nobody's paying attention, things get approved because everybody's in a panic because we have lockdowns and COVID and things are getting approved and there's Operation Warp Speed. And so how do we ensure quality of product? Where's the product being manufactured? Where's it coming from? 95% of our drug ingredients are coming from China. Who's overseeing all of this? Then Health Canada is supposed to look after our health, but they seem to just approve drugs based on funding from drug companies. And some of the glaring misses by the FDA and Health Canada, now calling themselves CADTH, are drugs such as Leqembi for Alzheimer's, Rexulti, Abilify Maintena, and I'm not even going to comment on vaccines. So when you talk to Health Canada about these issues, who approves the drugs? Why do they approve them? They tell me that, thank you so much for your integrity, Dr. Anna. We will get back to you. Nobody ever gets back to me. Nobody ever takes any responsibility. And it's almost impossible to get a drug withdrawn or questioned, or the number is usually blocked and patients can call, but nothing ever really seems to happen. So that's one thing. And then once a drug gets approval by Health Canada, all the doctors seem to think it's just perfectly safe to use. And the marketing is entirely unregulated. And an institution called IQVIA gets involved, and drug companies pay IQVIA to then conduct clinical research in Canada. So multi-site research and the data is collected by IQVIA. And all this information is available on the IQVIA site. You can see our medications, what we're using, what's happening, trends. And the trends for prescribing mental health drugs in Canada are absolutely shocking. And that's only going to lead to long-term disability and poor outcomes.
So on a lighter note, Wolf says actually it was Pfizer that took over as Minister of Health. It's a joke.
Well, yeah, it's always like it's often like that. I understand it's someone knows someone, and they talk, and it's who listens and who's feeding the information to the people that are in positions of authority to make changes. Right. And so after Duclos resigned as the health minister, Patty Hajdu took over, and her degree was in marketing and graphic design. And she's the one that called for the Quarantine Act and 4 years of lockdowns. A lot of things happened during the lockdowns. Dr. Kulvinder Kaur has been saying that, censorship kills. And if we can't ask questions, what is the purpose of everything? We're just completely silenced if we're not buying the narrative 100%. And so she actually had to get Elon Musk to defend her legally because everybody was after her, threatening her. And you can see how this happens. It's happened before with other whistleblowers like Dr. Nancy Oliveri and David Healy. The usual approach is, they discredit you, they threaten you, they threaten lawsuits, cease and desist orders, and they hope you will just be quiet. And sometimes in this situation with what I've been speaking up, for me, what happened during from 2021 to 24 at Island Health and at Fraser Health is so highly unethical, it's mind-boggling. And I can't just forget that it happened because I can't believe how many people were hurt by this. And if you say anything or you share a name, which Kirsten Anvik actually went to the Capital Daily and had her story written up by Tori Marlin from the Investigative Journalism Foundation of Canada. But if you say a name, you mention someone, they automatically say you are you're being careless and you're sharing patient data and patient confidentiality, and they throw in HIPAA. And HIPAA was introduced because Ted Kennedy wanted to cover up in perpetuity Rosemary Kennedy's records of her very botched lobotomy.
That I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
What happened there?
So Rosemary Kennedy had a developmental delay or problem, and her father, she was being more promiscuous, and her father, Joe Kennedy, I believe, took her to a famous psychiatrist. She underwent pickaxe lobotomy, and she was institutionalized after that. And so Rosemary Kennedy's story was what prompted the Kennedy family to be very involved with disability rights. And also Ted Kennedy, when he was then senator, got the legislation passed for the Health Information Privacy and Protection Act in order to keep her records locked up.
What would have her records would have been public record before that?
No, but it seems like patient information and data sometimes it can be used against you. So if anybody finds out anything, for instance, even I always tell patients, you can actually go to Island Health, request my records, and get your records and see what happened. And a lot of those records will be redacted unless a lawyer is requesting them. And you can see why, because medical error is actually quite common. And who knows what happened during that time. But obviously the family didn't want those records shared with the public.
I didn't know that. One more godless woman. Funny comment. She's like, actually, all lobotomies are botched.
Oh, and not only that, Monitz received, the inventor of the lobotomy and the Freeman lobotomobile, they used to go around and do lobotomies, actually received the Nobel Prize. So sometimes you have to question what it is that we do in medicine, because sometimes what we're doing is wrong. And I always bring up Semmelweis, who recommended hand washing, who ended up institutionalized because all his colleagues thought he was crazy. So sometimes the crazy ones are the correct ones. But I think it's important to always question the narrative. And I think it's important to have open, honest discussion. And you cannot censor free speech and silence doctors that are asking questions. That's not appropriate. And yet Bill 36, Health Professions and Occupations Act, was passed by Adrian Dix, and to silence doctors that are speaking up.
I'll come back to Bill 36. David has a question. You were talking about ethics. How do hospitals establish their ethics, and do they come under review often?
So my understanding was, prior to my speaking up about this, we didn't have an ethics committee at Vancouver Island Health. There was no ethics committee, and they've since appointed an ethicist who also, I believe, was employed by the Michael Smith Foundation. So I'm not sure if there are conflicts of interest or not, because Michael Smith Foundation receives pharma funding as well.
Do you need an ethics committee in a hospital? Or shouldn't doctors know this?
Shouldn't they? Yeah. So if you look at some of the doctors that I feel are not behaving appropriately, if you go through their credentials, you will see graduate of foreign medical schools. You will see China, India, Iran. I don't know. Is it possible that we don't do a good job teaching medical ethics? Is it possible that those countries don't teach medical ethics? There is a very good book written by Dr. Carl Elliott called White Coat, Black Hat, and it's all about research without full informed consent. Doctors that work for drug companies, specialists get paid in Canada $750 an hour, and family doctors that work for the drug companies get paid $350 an hour. You can imagine the work is limitless if you are an expert speaker. And I really admired one of the speakers at a dermatology meeting that I went to. He stood up in front of all of us and he said, "My name is Dr. Gold," I think was his name. He says, "I work for whichever medical device manufacturer pays me the most money, so take my lecture with a grain of salt." At least I felt that was transparency and honesty, versus someone spewing a narrative, which is really just a sales pitch for the drug company, such as Paxil or some drug magically balances your dopamine, or the ENT surgeons when they were selling the throat soothing nicotine, or the chemical imbalance, which has been completely discredited now. And Dr. Joanna Moncrief is doing some amazing work, and of course being criticized heavily by a lot of her colleagues, because anyone that speaks up, that goes against the narrative and speaks up about pharma is shunned. But Dr. Joel Lexchen has written extensively on it, how Big Pharma is way too close to doctors in Canadian medicine. And, we have transparency in America and it's no better. So I'm not sure what the solutions are.
RB Ham, I see your question there, but we're not going to talk about Event 201. I wanted to ask you on that same note about the College of Physicians. You told me about two separate incidents. One of them was a doctor that was spying on his staff or patients undressing, and he got a slap on the wrist. And the other one was Dr. Charles Hoff, who had his entire career and life destroyed. How do you view these two different approaches?
There are some really good family doctors that tell me the reason they resigned and stopped doing family medicine is because of the college. So I understand the college is, we need the college. We need oversight, and we need patients to be able to go to a body that does regulate physicians. But it seems to me that they are sometimes very heavy-handed with certain physicians, and they've put me through a fair amount. And other times they are very soft on acts that I think are so inappropriate, and there's no excuse for them. Putting cameras into bathrooms to spy on female patients and staff is inappropriate, and there's no excuse for that. And so I don't care if it's depression or what it is, that person should not be in a position of authority looking after patients. The end.
And what happened with Dr. Charles Hoff? Like I followed him somewhat from a distance. I saw that they were destroying his career, but was it because he spoke out against the vaccines?
I don't know. I haven't followed all of it. You can see if you go to the College of Physicians and Surgeons of BC and you look at complaints, you can see all the complaints that have been filed and all the disciplinary actions. And under my name is also a reprimand that I should not be speaking out of the scope of my practice. And I have no qualifications to talk about mental health because I've been criticizing psychiatry, specifically at Island Health. So I don't know, but I just feel like I've always felt college is a little bit of an old boys club. And if you know the right people, you'll get away with quite a lot. And if they decide they don't want to give you a license, for example, one of the people that has a license already in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta and wants to get a license here in BC, and they're refusing, or it's been problematic, I'm not really sure how they just make their decisions. And other people that are very frustrated with the college tell me that it's run by clerks. And so the clerks have really no idea what it is that we do.
Yeah, this charge of an old boys club, I've heard that levied against the unions as well. Like that they're resistant to change, and past a certain point, like they just make arbitrary decisions.
Well, because when I first left anesthesiology or the hospital to learn the business of cosmetics and try and run my own clinic in 2017, I had so many anonymous complaints, and it was just all these anonymous letters that the college made me respond to. And then afterwards, I called out in a public forum the doctors that I felt were practicing inappropriately because I wasn't getting anywhere with the college. And of course, that's when the reprimand came in. And then after that, Health Canada investigated this clinic for selling drugs. And they investigated the clinic for 2 years. And I said, what drugs am I selling? And they said, Botox and sunscreen. And I said, well, why are you not investigating all the other medi-spas out there that are selling sunscreen? Well, yours was the only clinic that was reported. Okay, so that dragged on for 2 years, and I went back and forth, and even to the college. And so sometimes I think so much time is wasted on things that just seem so irrelevant, and they're missing the whole forest for the trees. And other people are getting away with unbelievable things while others are getting punished for inappropriate speech or saying something that sounded remotely offensive or sexually inappropriate. And they get fined and they get reprimanded. And so, it's a necessary body, but for, to over-regulate and to not understand what it is that we're doing is problematic. Yeah.
That also is sort of a microcosm of what's happening in Canada, where somebody protests and they get thrown in jail for 3 years, and then you got 11 treasonous MPs and nothing gets done.
So it looks to me like there's certain things that are completely immune from prosecution. Like you can't, that Pfizer is immune for prosecution for 75 years or something. You can't fight government. You can't fight the health authority. They have lawyers on retainer in every fancy office. You just can't fight. Look at Dr. Brian Day, who's just been trying to fight for his clinic, I guess, and just try and get patients operated on because there's no operating time, not enough operating time for orthopedics. And he's been at it for 30 years and he's gotten absolutely nowhere. It's a little frustrating. So I think I sound like a broken record, but until the Canada Health Act gets looked at and until the Indian Act gets looked at, I think we're just going to be speaking in circles.
So I promise we'll get to that, both of those acts and Bill 36, but super spreaders, he's from up in Yukon. I've been going out of my mind learning about Health Ministry's appalling history with natural health products and how they kowtow to pharma and the colleges. What's your view on natural health products? Are they useful, not as useful as people say they are?
Well, the American Society of Anesthesiologists has a long list of naturopathic supplements and supplements that interact in a negative way with anesthetic drugs. So they're not benign. And there should be some oversight of natural products. But, to just say, oh, you can't use these products or you can only use these products, that's problematic for me because, there's a lot of so-called natural products that aren't all that natural. I mean, poison ivy is natural and high-dose vitamin C, vitamin E, ginkgo, ephedra can have serious implications with your anesthetic drugs. So it's important to understand drug interactions, and it's important to realize that no drug is perfect, nor no drug or supplement is perfectly safe, but nothing is that black and white. And when I speak to the ethicists, I find a lot of comfort in talking to medical ethicists like Dr. Schaefer. We've been talking about things like, you can't just say, okay, well, the medical system says this is the drug for this indication. Sometimes the natural way, or maybe the anti-inflammatory way, or maybe there's something that, you can find a better way of nourishing your body in order to stop disease. Maybe that is taking a little bit of an anti-inflammatory in the way of turmeric, or the orthopedic surgeons believe in chondroitin and glucosamine, and those are not medicines, they're from the vitamin store. So I think we need to be a little bit more open and start working together a little bit. The question is, who gets paid what and why? Why are they pushing a certain agenda? And what are the conflicts of interest? Because it seems like somebody is always trying to sell us something, right? And who do we believe? Do we believe the people that are trying to stomp out medical misinformation? Who's funding them? Why are they doing it? For me at this stage of my career, sure, I do cosmetic injectables. I order the drug from the drug company. I started my own skincare company that's not really mine. I'm just a consultant for this company. And I'm not really trying to sell you anything. I do think our system is very broken. And I come from a medical family where I think in order to solve it, it's going to require very bold leadership. And there's no political leader that has been willing to say, look, if you're non-clinical, non-direct patient contact, you're still working from home, We don't need you. So we need to really have a dodge for healthcare.
The Department of Government Efficiency.
Correct.
I support that. What about let's go to Bill 36. My understand the two main things I don't like about it. One is the destruction of doctor-patient confidentiality. The second one is it goes around the concept of a legislature. What are your views on that bill?
Well, I'm going against the bill, I guess. So the consequences apparently are a fine and jail time, I believe. So you're not allowed to criticize a health authority, but the thing is, I resigned from my health authority in 2020. So when they actually fired me and they asked me to leave the hospital escorted by security, I had already resigned, so they couldn't do much about me. So then the next thing was, let's complain to the college. So then I had to have a meeting with the college, and then let's complain to UBC and tell her she can't call herself a clinical assistant professor anymore because she doesn't work for us anymore. And so they really want to strip you of all your credentials, discredit you, and just silence you. And it has nothing to do with patient care, and nobody seems to care. And everybody just keeps talking like, oh yes, we're hiring more doctors, more nurses, we're building buildings, we're doing all this great stuff. But it's all just talk. Nothing has changed. And today, actually, on my way to work, I called the BC Ombudsman because I thought, I'm going to call the Ombudsman again and talk to Jay Chalk and see how come all those recommendations were made and none of them were implemented. Why is that?
Is that recommendations in Bill 36?
Recommendations on all the complaints that come through about government agencies, or specifically in this case, it had to do with the Jubilee Hospital and mental health services. But yeah, all these recommendations made and nothing was done.
Sounds like government to me.
Mm-hmm. So
David asks,
philanthropists that donate all this money to the Victoria Hospital Foundation, they need to be asking for accountability. Where is our money going? How is it being spent? That they're donating to a cause because they've had a good experience with cardiology or whatever, and they're donating. And now where is that money going? And it's a problem that we have very little transparency or accountability for spending.
I was just going to say, David was asking, I don't think he was here at the beginning, what's in Botox?
Pardon me?
David is asking, what's in Botox?
Botulinum toxin. So Botox has 5 different brands. So these are brand names, again, much like Moderna and Pfizer. There's brands for Botox. There's Botox Cosmetic, Botox Therapeutic, Dysport, Jeuveau, MyoBlock, and now a new one that's been FDA approved called Daxxify. And except for Daxxify, all 5 have human albumin from hundreds of blood donors. And that's not a big deal, probably, but it is a human albumin product, which I think patients should be aware because it is considered a biologic. So there was a tainted blood scandal at one point in the UK. And, if you keep repeatedly injecting human albumin into the body, perhaps there could be an autoimmune reaction or maybe a prion transmitted disease like Jakob-Creutzfeldt disease. So let's hope the drug companies screen their albumin, but they're not very transparent as to where this albumin is coming from.
David, that was a very lazy question. You could have just Googled that, buddy. What about I think you're pro college, but super spreaders. He's just asking, should the colleges be dissolved? I believe you made your position that no, they do serve a purpose.
Yeah, they do serve a purpose, and we need to. Where we have a problem is that the college only accepts complaints from patients. They do not accept complaints or worries or queries or anything, concerns about if a doctor or colleagues report another colleague. All
right. Asked and answered. Let's move on to the Canada Health Act. What is in practice, like what's the issue that you have with that?
So the Canada Health Act states that we have universal health care that is universally covered for medically necessary treatments by physicians. And, we can't expect I think in BC, we spend $30 billion on healthcare. It's about 46% of GDP across Canada. You can't just keep throwing money at a system that's not working. Patients can't expect to have everything covered, including their gender reassignment surgery. And we can't expect that everything will be covered by the taxpayer. It's simply impossible. And we've had two-tiered healthcare for a very long time. People don't understand that, but Department of Defense and WCB and politicians, they have expedited care. So there is a two-tiered system. And now, of course, with all these, we also have nurses, caseworkers working out of pharma budgets, so working for the drug companies. And I see that as potentially a big problem.
So let me ask the question in a more direct way. Do you take issue with the fact that it's a single payer model? Do you take issue with the fact that it's federal, not provincial? Or do you take issue with the fact that there's a whole bunch of garbage in there that shouldn't be in there, like cosmetic surgery? Not that cosmetic surgery is garbage, but it's not life-threatening.
Right. I take issue that there's no transparency and accountability at the provincial level of how the money is being spent and what are the outcomes. Because it's one thing to say, look, this is our wait list and this is what's happening and this is what we're doing and we're over capacity and we need more money. What about the outcomes? Are the thousands of electroconvulsive therapy patients that are being done at the Jubilee, do they have good outcomes? What is the patient satisfaction? Why are we doing all of this? So I think outcome data is very important. I read somewhere that per Canadian, we spend $9,000 on healthcare per person. There's been some talk about that money following the patient instead of the way it is happening now, in that the health authorities will receive a payment, a lump sum payment from the province, and I think obviously from the federal government, and then everybody gets paid out. So and then they run out of money. So what's supposed to happen? It seems to have nothing. It doesn't have anything to do with patient-centered care. It's more, let's look after the top, and then we'll figure out what happens at the bottom.
What does that mean? Follow the patient? Is that like you have an online account says 9,000 in there and you can use it for healthcare?
I'm not a politician. I don't know. But I just know right now that the healthcare transfer payments and the money that goes to the health authority is not reaching the patient.
Fair enough. Sorry, I'm asking you tough questions.
Yeah.
Here's one from one more godless woman. Botox is a big deal when people who donate blood thinking they're going to save a life rather than save an old face. Is there an ethical issue there?
Probably not, because blood banks, the business of blood banking, Red Cross, is a business. And what they do is whenever you donate blood, a unit of blood, what happens is the blood is separated into its components. When you receive a blood transfusion, you're not receiving whole blood. You're receiving components of blood. So they separate it into red blood cells. They separate it into platelet-rich plasma or fibrinogen and fresh frozen plasma. They freeze the plasma. So it's already divided up, and albumin is extracted from that, and then albumin is sold. And I believe the biggest buyer for albumin in North America is China.
Right. And Gary, I see your question, but Dr. Anna, this is not the Dr. Anna. He's asking a diabetes-related question. You need to talk to your own your family doctor. Final topic: the Indian Act. Most people wouldn't associate that with healthcare. Why have you lumped that into healthcare?
So what we see, so much of our homeless population, so much drug addiction, and what we see in Vancouver on Hastings and Pandora, and people under the Ministry of Children and Family Development. 75% of that group are First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. And it seems like we're not treating this group of people as Canadians. They have their own. There's actually something in the PharmaCare program. Even it's First Nations Health Benefits Plan is Plan W. So in the PharmaCare, so it's completely separate, and yet so much funding is going to drug addiction, and instead of looking at housing first policies, how to get families together, how to prevent children from being separated from their families, all of that, the amount of money we spend on flying people up and down from reservations to cities, food being transported there, and that's federal government's paying that. I think we could do better, and that I read Jody Wilson-Raybell's book, and it was all about explaining how this has all evolved, and the white paper, which was introduced by Chrétien and Trudeau in order to try and make everyone a Canadian. There's not a separate set of rules for this group of people or this group of people. We're all Canadian, and we're all covered under the same set of rules.
Yeah, I was briefly reading that white paper, not the white paper, the Wikipedia page on it this morning.
Mm-hmm.
It's really sad. Where I'm not a big fan of Pierre Elliott Trudeau, but it seemed like he was doing the right thing. Where we don't want discrimination, and he
Yeah.
got just pillared.
When I speak to a couple of the leaders, First Nations leaders, they say, that act would actually make a very big difference. So by revisiting that, and so I'm not familiar, I'm not I've never been involved in Indian affairs, but I do feel very strongly about human rights and equality, and I think that act is probably quite discriminatory. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, same with me. I tried reading a lot of the court cases and the acts themselves. It's not an easy, light read. They're very old documents.
Old documents, and it's always, whenever you see things happening and you don't understand why it's happening, it always comes back to those two documents, Canada Health Act and Indian Act. It always seems to come back to legislation that's at the federal level that needs to be addressed. And then, of course, once with the pharma stuff, it's once a drug gets approval, it's far from that's a safe drug. It means it's in a phase 4 trial, which means there'll be problems and recalls, and drug companies try and keep a drug under patent for as long as possible so they can collect as much money as possible. So they try and expand the indications. So that's how Botox went from being used for wrinkles to then bladders to TMJ to sweating, expanded indications so we can keep this drug under patent.
So I guess getting near the end of this episode, how's your battle going to get your message out?
I don't think anybody cares.
Seriously?
Yeah, seriously. I think it's like, because my battle was about what I felt was very inappropriate at our health authority was the whole for-profit, pharma-funded, with no consent. And I believe, I'm really disappointed in both our political parties, because I think this term involuntary is thrown around a lot. So the Conservatives said we're going to involuntarily lock up drug addiction because we need to detox, we need to give them treatment. And then David Eby followed and said, yes, I'm all on board with involuntary. Well, what does involuntary mean? Involuntary has been done way more in this province. We detained 30,000 people. So way more in this province than any other province. And forced treatments are the norm. And how is that working out? It's not working out all that well. And so we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the healthcare workers. So where are these people going to be locked up? Okay, so perhaps they'll be locked up in detox facilities or jails, but that's not what's going to happen. What's going to happen is there'll be way more of these ACT teams, community teams, home care nurses, and going to people's homes to inject them with antipsychotics. That's all that's going to happen. That'll be the involuntary treatment. And it's a very pharma-driven agenda.
Do you know Dr. Sang? Sang? Am I pronouncing it right?
Not sure what specialty.
I don't know, but he's You should reach out to him. I'm happy to introduce you. He's very vocal opposition to Bill 36, and he's trying to get change in BC for the healthcare system.
Yeah, yeah. So again, all of these things it has nothing to do with healthcare. It's all political. It's all political. So that's what's so disappointing because you go to medical school to first do no harm, to help your patient, and you're told how to practice, what to do, what to say, what not to say. And we've just lost two more orthopedic surgeons in Victoria, and people just don't want to practice in this system. So I don't know what the solutions are. I just know that there is no way I would ever go back and practice at my health authority. Well, they probably wouldn't want me, that's for sure. But why would you do that if that's the way things are and you're told exactly what you can do and can't do? And um, it's frustrating. Our hospitals are also full of drug addicted people that have nowhere to go, or the elderly that don't have a family doctor and can't be discharged after their broken hip. So that puts the operating rooms on standstill, and people are waiting. They're told that they're going to wait for another 2 years for surgery or to see a neurosurgeon, or it's not appropriate.
Do you think as doctors quit, leave, move to other jurisdictions, and there's less and less doctors, do you think that people will finally wake up, or do you think it just won't? It's too far gone?
No, I think the doctors will be replaced, and it'll be a system where there are people graduating now from school. They control the numbers. They're going to be replaced with nurse practitioners as well, and naturopaths. And I think what will happen is perhaps the standard of care will go down a little bit. But we were so scared when midwives took over deliveries, where everybody was, oh, I'm not going to take a referral from a midwife. Why is it a midwife and not a family doctor? And that's worked out just fine. So I think there'll be some growing pains. I think the system will survive, but the problem is still access to care. So if the access to care you may end up going to a clinic where you see a nurse practitioner. Dr. Jane Philpott talks about these clinics that are more community run. So in BC, we have these jurisdictions, so that the city could get involved. The district of Oak Bay could have their own walk-in clinic or something. But it's very difficult to make the current system work because there simply isn't enough money. The population is aging, technology is expensive, unions are strong, and you have to, people that work, the nurses have a strong union. And so, yeah, lots of challenges.
So I guess in closing off, Jerry has some nice comments for you, so you shouldn't be too demoralized.
Mhm.
Great guest, and I truly thank her for being honest. We need more professionals of all types just like her. So I think people are looking to, I'm going to call you a leader, leaders like you who speak the truth and, sacrifice your time and just keep doing what's right. So don't give up.
Well, what I'm finding is even in this clinic is even though we do lifestyle medicine or aesthetics, I just see the desperation out there. The people are 1 in 4 are probably without a family doctor or access to care. All the walk-in clinics are closed, and you just don't know where to turn. You don't know where to turn for, your very painful urinary infection or your cut finger. Or I had a referral from a dermatologist actually because I have some good lasers, a wart that was just very large and needed lasering off.
Gross.
Well, it's things like that. It's there are things that are not maybe essential or life-threatening, but there's just simply no access to care or to do a medication reconciliation, look at some of the meds, look at why some of the meds haven't been changed, the doses haven't been looked at. They're on 2 statins and 2 antihypertensives and dizzy, and they don't know where to go and where to ask questions. And I think telemedicine is not really the best solution because a lot of older people my parents included, aren't all that tech savvy. And you could see at the beginning of our podcast, I can't even figure out the microphone. So it's until technology is not that easy to use for older people. And so, Yeah, lots of challenges ahead, but I know we can do better. I know we can do better, and I think we need to start having these hard discussions and really looking at what we're doing with the drug companies. Because if you look at IQVIA, for example, and trends in prescribing, it will shock you as to that 1 in 3 youth are medicated for their mental health. I think that's just a tragedy.
I'm going to make a suggestion. Consider running for public office. You could even do it municipally. You gave the example of that municipality that hired a doctor directly.
Mhm.
You can make change, and even if you can't make change, it will give you a platform to make suggestions for change, and people will listen to you.
Mhm. I just don't know if I want to work for anybody anymore. Now that I've had a taste of freedom and my own business, I'm not sure I would ever go back and work for someone.
Yeah, that's true. You would have to, I guess you would answer to the people, and the people are, they're very difficult to deal with sometimes. So.
And I think that's another issue. If you go through medical school, it's so hard to get into medicine. My youngest didn't get in. He tried to UBC, and he's an honors student, great marks. They just don't. It's very difficult, and so then you try again and you try again, and then you go and you finish med school, you finish your residency, and now you're well into your 30s with student loans, and now you have to go work for someone and being told what to do and how to practice, and nobody's listening to you. The orthopedic surgeons have asked for a block room forever because they said, if we do a block before we do the surgery, it's going to really facilitate hospital discharge. Nobody listens. It's not available. The cancer clinic has asked for a small operating room to do some of their brachytherapy, and for decades, not available. Sorry, can't be done. So it's always like that. But yet we can hire more people to do information systems, more bureaucrats. I saw a bunch of them walking over for coffee across the road in their Island Health jackets and branded cars. And we can do that, but we can't do some of the things that the doctors and nurses are asking that would actually directly affect patient care.
Well, we'll see where it goes. I don't blame you for preferring to, run your business rather than answering to some annoying boss.
But it's going to take bold political leadership, because every political party just wants to have the popular vote. So nobody wants to make those hard decisions because they just want to be reelected every 4 years. And these are some very difficult, we're in difficult times. The decisions made now are going to affect us down the road. And I have to actually say something good about the current leading party, the NDP, in that they've built some infrastructure, some more. There's been a hospital built up north. I think our new health minister, Josie Osborne, is listening to people and taking more of a small town community approach to healthcare. I have hope, but I think people need to start leading authentically and to stop hiding. And if errors have been made, and if we can do better, we need to do better.
Well said. Dr. Sylwestrowicz, thank you very much for coming back on, and best of luck getting on to other podcasts in the future.
Yeah. Have a great day. Thanks for the opportunity.
No worries. Take care.
Mm-hmm.